Hi, I'm Metta Spencer, and let's go to Hawaii, okay? There is somebody there that I am just dying to talk with, and her name is Wright. About 10 years ago, I was in Belgium for some kind of an International Peace Bureau meeting, and we had dinner, and right next to me sat this very interesting woman who asked me where I was born. I don't know why, but it came out that I said, no, you would never know where I was born. I was born in a little town called Calera, Oklahoma. Well, she was born about 4 miles from there, but she was born 16 years after I was, and I'd already moved away, so there was no way we would have met in Oklahoma. But isn't it amazing that we got acquainted there? And she is the most interesting person you will ever meet. I never read anybody's CV on this show, but I'm going to read some of it from hers just to show you. Boy, does she have a background. Ann Wright worked was in the U.S. Army for basically military for 29 years. She was 13 years on active duty and 16 years in the Army Reserve, and she rose to the rank of colonel. In 1987, she went to work for the Foreign Service. And for a long time in the State Department, she serves as Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. embassies in Afghanistan, which she helped to open after the invasion. And she worked in Sierra Leone, which was an embassy that she volunteered. She helped us close, and then she had to reopen it. And she worked in Micronesia and Mongolia, and in Uzbekistan, which she helped open, in Kyrgyzstan, Grenada, and Nicaragua. Now, listen, she spoke out. She spoke out against the bombing in Somalia, and she spoke out, and she got an award for heroism in 1997 by the State Department for helping to evacuate several thousand people during the Civil War in Sierra Leone. How about that? And then when the U.S. was about to invade Iraq in 2003, she publicly resigned. And then she's gone on. She's a peace activist par excellence. She was a passenger on one of those ships in the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, which was boarded by, I would say, bad guys. She has been arrested. Listen, I thought I was a peace activist. Oh, no way can I compare to this woman. She collects bracelets of when she's been arrested. She saves these bracelets, and she's got a good collection. I have never been arrested. Never.
Oh,
never. I mean, I'm sorry. I just, I feel
never
ashamed.
Too late.
It's not too late. Well, maybe. Hi, Ann. How are you?
Hey, Metta, I'm really well. Thank you. It's great to be with you this morning.
That's terrific. And you're in your condo in Hawaii.
That's right. That's where I live, in the occupied sovereign nation of Hawaii.
What? All right.
Well, it was occupied
there.
125 years ago when the U.S. Marines took it over from the Queen of Hawaii, a sovereign nation. The king of Hawaii several years before had made the first round the world voyage of any head of state in the whole world. So it was a sovereign nation, and the U.S. took it over. So I'm on occupied land right now in Hawaii.
Canada, anytime you're going to have a public event, you begin with a statement of acknowledgement that you're on somebody else's land, and it's always a local Indian tribe or indigenous group's tribe. I don't know how much that has spread to the U.S., but it's definitely true. Even in my church, before we pray to God, we acknowledge that we're occupying somebody else's land.
Well, it's very prominent in the U.S. now, both in lands that have been taken from the Native Americans, and certainly here in Hawaii, we always acknowledge that this is occupied land, that the colonial settlers on.
Certainly now we know much more in the last 6 months than the average Canadian knew a year ago, that the history of Canada's mistreatment of Indigenous people has been just horrendous. We sort of knew there were bad things that had happened, but with the discovery of these residential schools and the mistreatment and even many deaths that occurred, far more than you would regard as a natural and normal mortality rate for any children's population. Nowadays, people are becoming much more mindful of our abuse as settlers, if we want to use that word.
Oh yeah, we have a strong sovereignty movement that says we want all the land back. We want the U.S. government out of Hawaii, and we want to create our own sovereign nation again. So that's on one side of the spectrum, and it goes all the way through to the recognition of still the taking of lands by eminent domain or by leasing lands for $1 for 65 years for 30,000 acres of Hawaii state land by the U.S. military. We have a very strong movement of trying to get lands back from the U.S. military, because this is one of the most militarized places on Earth. On the island of Oahu, where I live, we have 4 major military bases. Over 30% of the land is taken by military bases. And on the Big Island of Hawaii is the largest military training range, 130,000 acres. That's between the 2 sacred volcanoes of the Big Island that has been bombed for well before World War II. The issue of treatment of indigenous peoples by settlers, same thing happened here in Hawaii. I mean, and it was done by the missionaries. I mean, the churches have a lot to reckon with what they did. The missionaries, primarily the Congregationalist Church out of New England, sent lots of missionaries over on whaling boats. And the missionaries decimated the Hawaiian language, the Hawaiian dress. Hawaiian was not spoken in Hawaii except in the families, and it was a hidden language until the 1970s, when finally the sovereignty movement started moving forward. And now we have Hawaiian language immersion schools.
Really?
To our knowledge, we don't have the situation where kids were killed in schools. We don't have that, but certainly the treatment of Native Hawaiians by the settler class has been horrific here in Hawaii, and it's the Native Hawaiian population that really has the lowest income, the lowest access to jobs, and really the lowest graduation into from high school, college level education. So there's a lot of work that's going on within the Hawaiian community to address these inequities that have occurred here in Hawaii.
Well, would you see this as some kind of reflection of, I can answer my own question, of racism? Of course it has to be. What else could it be? But the thing that springs to mind, well, 2 things that you've evoked in my imagination right now would be the Marshall Island people, who have suffered by far the most of anybody, and were regarded as, pardon the expression, savages. There was a deliberate attempt to experiment with them. Originally, the experiment was going to be done on mice, and you could see, he showed where the word mice had been crossed out and people, Marshall Islanders, inserted. So they deliberately did experiments on subjecting these people to radiation and then monitoring them, measuring their health effects and their death rate and all of that afterward. Clearly, they treated them as subhuman.
Well, they took, pardon me, they took the lands. They exploded 67 atomic and nuclear weapons on the lands, decimating certain atolls. They moved people out of nearby islands after the explosions had taken place, so they were irradiated. They do have continuing documentation of the experimentation, and in fact, some Marshall Islanders are still brought to Hawaii for an annual checkup to see, what happened to them. And it wasn't only in the Marshall Islands, but the downwinders, just as on the continent of the U.S. The nuclear explosions that happened in New Mexico and then the nuclear test facility in Nevada, the downwinders in both Nevada and in the Pacific, the downwinders that were in other nations now of Micronesia, that going all the way out to Guam, the experimentation by the U.S. With these atomic and nuclear weapons is a horrible blight in the history of the United States.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, the other line of thinking that you evoked in me was we both are from a place that it turns out is Choctaw Reservation in Oklahoma. And when I lived there, I did not know that I was on a Choctaw reservation. Nobody ever said so, ever. Now there's a huge casino a couple of miles from where I was born, sort of halfway between my birthplace and yours. And it's owned by the Choctaw people, apparently big money maker. But there are signs everywhere saying Choctaw territory and so on. Now, I am part Choctaw, I believe, although there's an interesting story, which is only really interesting to me, but whether we really are Choctaw. Anyway, but you say for sure you have people in your family who are Choctaw. Okay, now my mother was educated in a girls' school, which was run by the Choctaw, run by, I believe, Presbyterians or somebody, for Choctaw girls. And so that would qualify as a residential school, but I never heard her say anything negative about it. My question is, of the residential schools for Indian people in the U.S., is there any allegation that they were as lethal or as abusive as we are finding out that the Canadian residential schools were? I think that her school was considered kind of a privilege or good thing to be in, but I don't know. Do you know anything about that?
Well, yes, there have been, I don't know specifically about that school, but there certainly are lots and lots of documentation on residential schools for Native Americans of the various tribes that are in the continental United States. The Choctaw themselves didn't really have a reservation as we think of it, like the Navajo reservation and specific land mass. They were kind of assimilated as they were forced to move first from North Carolina and then down into Mississippi and then up into Oklahoma. And they became landowners. So the Choctaw Nation, while it has some specific land that they have repurchased, is made up of people who are private landowners. The Choctaw Nation and its very interesting way of creating money actually from the settler class, this being casinos, and sending buses down to Dallas, all the way down to Houston to bring up people who want to waste their money in these gambling places. Well, the Choctaw haven't become almost as powerful as the state of Oklahoma in terms of its financial resources. And in fact, the state of Oklahoma many times goes to the Choctaw Nation to say, we don't have enough money to repair some of these roads and bridges. Could we ask you all to do that? And the Choctaw Nation has been very good about knowing it's their Choctaw people of their Choctaw tribe that go on these roads. They've helped the state of Oklahoma out. But the Choctaw Nation has one of the best health systems for Choctaw there is in the United States. It has an educational program where Choctaw can get scholarships. They have vocational programs. They have a housing program where the Choctaw Nation helps provide funding, and you provide part of the funding and work to build a nice home. So there are very, very few Choctaw that are homeless because the Choctaw Nation actually really takes care of its own and others. Some of the Cherokee that live in the area also get medical services from the Choctaw. So it's really a model. And several of my cousins have served on the housing boards and the hospital boards of the Choctaw Nation. So every time I go through Durant and Calera and spend the night with them, I'm always asking what the latest is on the medical situation or the housing situation, and they tell me all of these wonderful stories of how really good leadership of the Choctaw Nation has been the key to their ability to be able to provide for the members of the Choctaw Nation.
I believe there are other, what they call reservations. If you look on a map, you can find a reservation. And my town, Calera, was right smack dab in the middle of it. And Durant, of course, was right near. But are there other reservations in that sense that other nations could be developing their own healthcare or education system and so on?
Well, yes, and several of the Native American tribes of the United States have done exactly that. The model came from a Native American tribe up in Connecticut. They were the very first ones that saw, oh, well, there's a propensity for people to waste their money in these things called casinos, and we'll just build some. So they were kind of right between New York City and Boston, and there became a big movement of gamblers. So that was kind of the model. And then other Native American tribes decided, well, we'll just try that. So you have casinos that are all over the Midwest that are run by various Native American groups. And certainly out in the West, a lot of the casinos are run by Native Americans.
Interesting. And now, are they reviving languages too?
Yes, there is. Although it's, there aren't a lot of people that are learning it. But my understanding is that in Oklahoma and in Mississippi both, there are specific language courses and schools that are taking place for the language.
Yeah, about 20 years ago, there was a young man who was staying with me off and on, and he was taking courses in Mohawk. Maybe that's not even what they call it, but it was the language of the Mohawk people. And there's a wonderful oral tradition that the Mohawk people have, the Great Law. And it's really a wonderful, you could use it, and I think it has actually been referred to by people developing constitutions for new countries and so on, because it is it has wonderful, it's a peace constitution in so many ways. And there's the image they have is a tree with a bird that's on the top, and this is the bird of peace or something is on the top of this tree, and then there are roots and all kinds of symbolism. But he was taking, there's certain traditions where an elder, if he's really smart, will have memorized the whole thing and be able to recite it in a ceremony that lasts like a week or something, days and days of word for word, repetition of this great law by memory. And he was recording this and transcribing it for the first time into print. So far as I know, I don't think he ever finished the job. He didn't stay with me that long, but it may be the only record of a transcript of the whole great law ritual.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that is amazing. And we have a kind of a similar thing here in Hawaii. that came. Well, I saw it in action at a court proceeding. There were, we've had a lot of disputes on the Big Island about whether or not giant astronomical observatories should be continued to be built on the top of Mauna Kea, which is the tallest extinct volcano in Hawaii. It's 14,000 feet tall, and there are some 20 observatories that have already been built up there. It's one of the leading places in the world for deep space exploration by observatories. Well, the scientific community has built all this stuff up on the top of the sacred mountain. The stewards of these have not been good about, when an observatory is finished, that they take it down, so that there is, a respect for the mountain. So Native Hawaiians have taken things into their own hands, and they've blocked access up to Mauna Kea over the last 5 years at various times. And 2 years ago was a remarkable, 60-day standoff with officials, and all of the elders, the kapuna, as they're called. 35 of them locked arms and got arrested. And of course, that got a lot of publicity, because here you have people that are older, that are the wise people of all of the islands, had come over there to make a statement saying, you cannot continue to build the latest one is called the 30-meter telescope, which would be the largest telescope in the world, which is, it's important for research, but it's also important to respect the land. And so they were making the point that you're not going to bring the stuff up on the mountain till we have if ever, but first we're going to have a long discussion about it. Well, of course, many of them got arrested, or 35 of them got arrested. Well, in one of the court hearings over on the Big Island in the town of Waimea, one of the first hearings happened, and I flew over to the Big Island because I wanted to be there in solidarity with them. Well, there is a state law in Hawaii that Hawaii is one of the official languages of the state of Hawaii. Well, in the court, two of the persons started in their testimony, they started speaking in Hawaiian, and the judge said, well, wait a minute, I don't understand Hawaiian. And they went, well, that's not our problem. It was a lady judge. That's not our problem, judge. It's a law. It's a state law that we can speak in Hawaiian. And so they had to stop the court hearing, and then they got a Hawaiian translator in, who sat there, and for the rest of the audience, like me too, that don't understand Hawaiian, a little bit, but not enough to go through this. Well, each one of these people, they were told that they needed to show why they had a connection to the land, and why they should be allowed to be bringing a lawsuit against the state for putting another telescope up there. And each one of them said, this is the connection I have to the land. And each one of them had an hour-long recitation of their family history it went back to the ancient chants that are still done in Hawaii, which are the oral history of the people of Hawaii. And they started with these oral chants. Both of them are professors of Hawaiian history, so they knew their stuff. And for an hour, it was one thing after another, and they would pause to let the translator tell us what that part of the connection was. I mean, it was the most beautiful recitation of the oral history, or by oral history, of the history of the Hawaiian people. And at the end of it, of each of the testimonies, the judge complimented them very, very much on their knowledge, their history, and each one of them said, "But Judge, that's what all of us have that we're sitting out there. We all have this history. That's why we are connected to the land, and that's why we are trying to preserve it and take care of it and be stewards of the land. It was a beautiful, beautiful time.
What kind of institutions have they sustained all these years that enabled them to support their own cultural traditions?
Well, I feel, I mean, I'm just what they call a haole. I'm a new person here. I'm a settler, and I'm not really the one to be, telling all of the details of all of the education, but I will tell you what I know. But it would be wonderful, and I can give you the names of some wonderful, wonderful Hawaiian activists who would enlighten you much more than I will. But I will say there are Hawaiian immersion schools. There are a series of schools called the Kamehameha schools, which is the name of one of the kings of Hawaii, and the trust that he made, which allows for Native Hawaiian schools on each one of the islands. And you have to have a certain percentage of Hawaiian blood in order to go to those schools. So the language is taught there, but I think the larger place is in the civic groups, the halaus, or the groups that teach hula. And we think of hula as kind of Polynesian women in grass skirts, but it's not. It's not just that. It's men and women. Men dance hula, and they learn the chants of the hula generally, and the hula has words that go with it. It's not just a flowing dance. There are words that are spoken by a chanter or sung by a chanter, and many times repeated. And well, they're always learned by the hula group. That's one of the responsibilities. If you dance hula, you learn the Hawaiian.
Do you sing words. The chant while you're dancing?
Sometimes they do, but most of the time it's the chanter that is carrying that. But then during the part of the dancing itself, there will be times when there is repetition by the dancers themselves. And one of the wonderful cultural events of Hawaii each year is called the Merry Monarch. It's a hula competition that is one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen in the world. I mean, I travel around the world and seen beautiful things in many cultures, and I would put the Merry Monarch hula competition up there with any of them, between the beauty of the costumes that are made. They're not just little grass skirts. I mean, these are beautiful, beautiful explosions of color and of different ways of making dress so they can be used in a hula competition. But the beauty of perhaps anywhere from 5 people up to 30 or 40 people dancing the same hula, the same chanting. It's really a beautiful thing, and it's on TV now. The last 2 years they haven't been able to have in person, but even when it was in person over on the Big Island in Hilo, you could watch it on TV on all of the islands, and now they have DVDs that are made of it. But it really is.
If there are any available on YouTube or something, I'd love to see this.
Yes, there would be, and it's called the Merry Monarch. And it was the Merry Monarch was one of the kings who loved music and loved dancing. And he was, while he was reigning, he was called the Merry Monarch because he sponsored song competitions and hula competitions.
I want to see it. I'm getting an education today from you. Completely different topics, but all fascinating. Yeah. Now, what kinds of politics are these people promoting? In Canada, I think generally in the world, I don't know whether it's true or not, but we certainly have the impression that the leadership of environmental protection of the earth we owe an awful lot to indigenous populations. That it certainly Canadian people, tribes, nations are generally in favor of reducing any kind of violation of the earth by mines and drilling and this and that. So overall, the effect is to protect the natural beauty of and health of the planet. And it sounds as if these Hawaiians have some particular cause or idea about how they're going to protect Hawaii. Is that the case? And if they're protecting their sacred mountain, are they protecting other things equally?
Oh, yes. The whole concept of taking care of Mother Earth and taking care of the land. And in Hawaiian, land is Aina, A-I-N-A. And Malama is taken care of or being a steward for. So the overall phrase is Malama Aina. That means you take care of the land and the sea. And in fact, in Hawaiian culture, the land was divided up. When it was a part of a kingdom, it was divided from the top of the mountain all the way down to the sea, because the movement of resources from the land down to the sea was a part of knowledge, of native knowledge, that you need all parts of this. You need to take care of it as it goes from the mountain on down to the sea. And various types of agriculture, which was to take care of the land, the growing of various types of produce that would take care of floodwaters as heavy rains might be coming down from the mountains, but would be there to absorb the water so it just wouldn't be washing the earth totally away. And then the taro root, which is one of the great foods of the Pacific, growing taro. That was one of the products of agriculture. And then, of course, there were plenty of fruits that are grown here. And then when you look down to the sea, the fishermen actually built big fish ponds. They built large stone walls out into the shallow part of the reef area, so that, and then they built little entry fences where fish could swim in and out of the fish pond until they got to a certain size where they were too big to get out. Oh. And so they were easy pickings for the Hawaiians, the ones that came in and kept eating and then got big enough that they were able to be caught essentially by hand. So those fish ponds, the remains of them have been, many of them have been restored for cultural purposes, but also, as a method of fish production for the local population. Okay. So it's really interesting, and everyone is invited to come out and help restore the fish ponds. And there are groups that are actively working to restore the various other cultural parts of Hawaii, like the heiau, which is stone platforms that were built that were the center for spiritual events for the community. And many of these heiaus are up on the mountain sides and have been overgrown over the years. And people are going up, and usually it's on a Saturday and a Sunday. And today there's one actually going up and cutting away all the weeds and the small trees. So there's a very active Malama Aina, taking care of the land movement here in the Hawaiian Islands.
That's lovely. Now, you mentioned that, and I already knew that Hawaii is one of the most militarized places in the world. What is the attitude of the Hawaiian population toward the military bases?
Well, it's a two-edged sword. the military provides a huge number of jobs, and other than the tourist industry, the military is the main job producer, and people need jobs. So there are people that say, well, they are already here, they have the lands, and I need a job, so I'll work for them. And there are Native Hawaiian kids, kids all around the United States. If their family doesn't have a lot of money, if they don't have an opportunity to go on to college because they can't afford it, then the military is standing there ready to recruit them. And so we have a lot of military Hawaiian veterans, a large veteran population here. So on one level, a great number of people of the Hawaiian community are calling for the return of many of the lands that the military has had here in Hawaii over the decades. I mean, starting with 1898, with the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom, it immediately started taking lands. And as the U.S. military came in larger numbers, particularly after World War I, and then on steroids as Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese in World War II, then the focus of the military in Hawaii became very, very big. So what we're trying to do now, or me working with Hawaiian groups, is the return of many of the lands that have been used by the U.S. military for the last 75 years since World War II, and particularly these lands that are coming up, 30,000 acres that are coming up for lease renewal in 2029. The military, I think, as I'd mentioned before, had leased these 30,000 acres for $1 for 65 years. I mean, what a land giveaway. So we're doing the analysis of each of the three properties that these 30,000 acres are on. About the military, of course, will, and I say this having been in the military for 29 years, the military will always say, oh, we have to have every inch of land because it's critical for our national security. Well, I know from having been in the military, and citizens know from having been blindsided by the military and our politicians all too often, the military doesn't need all this stuff. So we are challenging the state of Hawaii not to give another lease on these 30,000 acres and to start returning much of the land that the military claims it needs, but it really doesn't. And when we see Hawaii with a housing shortage, with so many people that have moved in here, and the Native Hawaiians are the ones that are kind of pushed to the side on social justice issues, this is one of the ways that we're trying to claim back the agency for Native Hawaiians.
Okay, this topic is a segue back to talking about your own career, your own position as a former military officer. And whereas you say that lots and lots of people in the Hawaiian group or even any other part of the military, lots of people go into the military because it's a job and they may not have a career otherwise. And it's a good source of security in a certain sense. So that's true for, I would say, lower level people, but that can't have been the case for you. You served in the military all along when you had other options, and you certainly went into it knowing what it was, and you were a professional, and you must have some principles that guided your ethics throughout that period of time. And so, which, that would not match that of very many other peace activists that I know. There are a few Canadian military people who are also peace activists, but it's not as common as the opposite. I'd like to know the trajectory of the how you became Ann Wright, ex-colonel, ex-ambassador, etc.
Well, You're right. My background is not like those that are coming out of a family situation with very little resources. Uh, I had gone to college, but I wanted to get out of the state of Arkansas where I grew up. And back in the 60s, the traditional roles for women were school teachers, nurses, secretaries, and homemakers. And I didn't want to do any of them. Even though I was trained to be a teacher, I'd done my practice teaching and decided there was no way in the world that I was going to put up with those high school kids and be a teacher. So when the Army recruiter came through the university campus and said, join the Army, see the world, and you won't have to go to Vietnam. It was right during the Vietnam thing, because you're a woman, and unless you volunteer, you won't go. And I said, well, can I go to Europe? And he went, oh, of course, everybody that's not going to Vietnam. I mean, a lot of people go to Europe because we're having to move the guys out of Europe to go to Vietnam. So you have a really good chance. That was probably the only truthful thing a military recruiter ever said. So I thought, well, for 2 years, and at that time you could join up for 2 years, and you got the 4-year educational benefits through the GI Bill. And I thought, well, that's a no-brainer. I can handle that. I can march and salute for 2 years if I get 4 years of educational benefits. So I signed up. My first assignment was at the Presidio of San Francisco. So I was right there in San Francisco, and right during the height of Haight-Ashbury, the anti-war movements, all of that. So I got a real indoctrination there. And then
What years, excuse me, what years were you there? Because I think we may have been there at the same time.
I was there in the year 1969.
Okay.
And then in 1970, after 1 year at the Presidio, I was then eligible to request a transfer to Europe, and I did, and got the reassignment, and went to a NATO subcommand called Allied Forces Central Europe, which was in the Netherlands. And so I spent 2 years there, and by that time, a lot of friends that had gone through basic training with me, they had gotten over to Europe. So I was able to travel all over Central Europe, from Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, where I had friends. So I got to travel, stay with friends, see a lot of Europe. And I thought, wow, I like Europe. I want to stay there. So I said to the Army after the 2 years there, I want out. I want to go travel, do what I want to do. But I thought, I'm going to stay in the reserves, because sometimes you can get recalled to active duty, and it'll, I just want to keep a hand in that. And so for the next 3 years, I traveled all over Europe. I traveled from Europe through the Middle East, through
Sorry,
Iran.
as an officer in the military, or were you just doing this on your own?
As a civilian. Yeah, as a civilian.
Okay.
And just hopped on a bus that was leaving London, and they said, next stop, Kathmandu, Nepal, 6 months later. And we camped out the whole way. During that time, you could travel through Iran. I went through Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, up into Nepal. And then the group split apart there and went down to Burma, back into India, then Burma, Thailand. So, I got to see the world, and at a certain point, went back to the U.S. And started using the GI Bill to get a graduate degree and a law degree. And it was during that time that the Vietnamese resettlement started, the fall of Saigon, the movement of like 150,000 Vietnamese and other people from Indochina left as the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong became the government of all of Vietnam. And I was recalled to active duty to help, similar to what's happening right now. Military bases on the continental United States were used as refugee resettlement areas. And I was recalled to active duty. I was back in Arkansas going to graduate school. So Fort Chaffee, Arkansas was a 2-hour drive from the university. So I spent almost 6 months down there helping with the military support for the resettlement project, which meant that we provided the housing, the food, the sundry supplies, the clothing for a continuing population of 30,000 people. We would have hundreds of people that would be, just as what's happening right now, hundreds of Afghans are leaving the military bases where they were first brought into and are going to live in communities all over the United States that are being sponsored by religious groups, civic groups. And as those hundreds leave each day, then hundreds more are brought in from other places. At that time, they were being brought in from Guam and the Philippines. Now they're being brought in from military bases in Europe to backfill in the 5 U.S. military bases that are being used for the Afghan resettlement project. So I was on active duty with for that and various other things. So your question of why did I stay in? Well, I ended up being I ended up, while I knew how to shoot weapons, I never had to kill anyone, and I don't think I probably could have. But I was a part of the nonviolent part of the military, if you can call that, the part that is called on to help out in domestic humanitarian or international humanitarian events. Mm-hmm. So that's where and my specialty was in the area of civic action, which is a component of primarily in the reserve component, where citizens that are part of the Army Reserves join up with these units, but they have in their civilian background skills that are needed by the military and can be on call to help out in emergencies, whether it's in floods, hurricanes, or refugee resettlement. So that's kind of where I stayed in, because I kept getting involved in very interesting jobs that didn't involve killing anyone or hurting anyone, even though
it sounds like real peace work from inside the military, because this is the kind of thing that we would be advocating. In fact, I would love it if a lot of the military operations were sort of morphed into doing that kind of work, because there's plenty of it, as well as plenty of environmental types of projects that the military could be doing instead of some of the things they are doing that I don't quite approve of.
Well, and you know, in Vietnam, both in Vietnam and in Afghanistan, the U.S. kept talking about this nation building, bringing in people to help with skills of helping reestablish or establish schools and medical clinics and things like that. But it's in areas where the U.S. has come in by military force to start with, mm-hmm. and that puts a total different view on it. The military is certainly capable of doing these things in areas where there is no force to be used, but it is used as a kind of a symbol of U.S. goodness to the American public to kind of camouflage over its violent invasion and takeover and occupation of other countries.
Well, I don't know that much camouflage is needed. I think by and large, the American population does not disapprove of all these bombing raids and things. I remember when the Iraq War took place, and you had already at that point resigned from the military on principle. But I remember my TV was right by my bed, and all night long I had it on, and I was watching. And these beautiful planes, they are gorgeous. You know, these planes are such elegant designs, and they're such beautiful things. And I see them taking off and then coming back in, and thinking of what they had done. And you'd see the glow of the beautiful nighttime bombings. Mm. You know, yeah. There's a kind of, I don't know what, thrill. There's a kind of a thrill in watching horrible things. It's kind of perverse, but it isn't really that that everybody is totally horrified. Many people are excited and pleased. I have a friend who was a sniper in the jungles of Myanmar, and he said, you know, it was a great day when I was able to kill somebody. You know, it's like winning in a sport or something. Your goal is that's what he was there for, was to kill people. And it was it was a thrill. So he'd be so excited he couldn't sleep that night. He succeeded, you know.
Well,
So,
the
you know,
dehumanization that the military teaches people of not to consider that target that he was so thrilled that he was able to kill. Don't consider that they are a human being, that they've got families, that they've got, there's a reason why they were out there, just like there was a reason that he was out there. And unfortunately, there was probably a sniper on the other side that was looking for him to try to kill him.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, I think there was it Teddy Roosevelt or somebody, I've forgotten which American president, really was talking about how military action was a kind of a thing that young men need in order to test their strength, their identity, their vitality, that being in the army and being in battle was a developmental project for some, you know, that all young men should have it. And he then went on to say, well, you know, let's switch it. Let's have a battle against nature. This was before nature was considered our friend instead of our enemy. But in those days, we had to subdue nature. We had to conquer nature. We had to destroy nature and make it into something that we could control by human beings. And the notion was, you know, let's have a unit that would be sort of like a military unit, but it would be demanding and difficult and challenging, and young men could test their own stamina and strength and vitality by how well they succeeded in this struggle against nature, which would be a lot better than a struggle against other people.
Well, on one level, yeah, I understand, the concept of that, but you know, the whole issue of the nation and the families saying that you know, military service is the way that you know, that it's a rite of passage, and that you do have to go, you know, be strong, go kill somebody. All of this is such a contorted, evil way of bringing up kids. They don't have to be brought up that way, and they can certainly be brought up saying, yes, you can test your courage by going out and helping. Well, first try to prevent forest fires, but let's try to protect the country, your neighbors from horrible fires. There are other ways that we can change the dialogue, but we're so steeped in this historic memory of killing as being a rite of passage for young men, and you know, young women too. On one level, the U.S. is now having this conversation about whether the selective service, that women will have to register for a potential draft just like men do, and I'm totally against both of them registering, actually. So it is a conversation that needs to be had, but it's kind of like the pride of the older generations that we did this made us into the people that we are. Many of the people that say that can't even relate to their own families, that they've had such bad experiences in the military, and they have post-traumatic stress, even from the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and now 40% of the young men and women who've been in these wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, are now on permanent disability. 40% of them on permanent disability, and most of it's for psychological disability, of the inability to deal with what they've done or what they've seen during military service.
I have heard, and I maybe my figures may be wrong, so don't believe me now, but I'm making this up, but I think it's that I heard it, that there were more people who have committed suicide after returning home from the military than were killed by fighting in battles. Am I wrong, or did I really hear that?
Oh yeah, you're exactly right. Interestingly enough, the numbers of U.S. military that were killed in both Iraq and Afghanistan were very, very low. In Afghanistan, it was 2,400 some odd, and I think in Iraq it was like 4,000. in comparison to the numbers of Afghans and Iraqis that were killed, like hundreds of thousands of them, plus coalition forces. There were actually more contractors, American contractors, killed in Afghanistan than there were military. Over 4,000 contractors were killed. But suicides are the real killers now, that people cannot deal with what they've done or seen. And we're having in the US 22 suicides a day. So the suicide of epidemic of not being able to deal with it. Of course, that's not anything that's ever talked about by these politicians as they start saying, oh, we need to have a military buildup so that we can address China or Russia, rather than, dialogue, which one would think in this day and age, you just keep talking these things out. But no, we're on steroids out here in the Pacific, where in the Western Pacific, near the South China Sea, there's a huge armada of US ships, NATO ships, and Chinese ships that are all plying the waters and in a very dangerous confrontation on the high seas that could, by mistake, end up in a terrible catastrophe for us all.
Now, you've certainly done your stint both as a foreign service officer and certainly, from my point of view, as a peace worker. Where are you going from here? Do you have any organization or any project that you're particularly engaged with now?
Well, I work with Veterans for Peace, an organization of veterans that say no more war for peace. I work with Code Pink Women for Peace, which is a dynamic women's organization, although we have good, strong men that are part of it. I work with Women Cross the DMZ, which is a group of 30 women that in 2015 went to North Korea to talk to Korean women about the need for peace.
I think Janice Alton is part of that group.
Yes,
yes,
she is indeed. Yeah. So I work with a lot of organizations, and here in Hawaii, we have the Hawaii Peace and Justice. We have Refuse Fascism. We have a lot of organizations that I work with, and in the days since COVID, the number of webinars that I'm grateful to be asked to speak about my views on various things. And the last month has been on Afghanistan, since I helped reopen the embassy there, and then have been back to Afghanistan many times. And my call for the U.S. to withdraw from Afghanistan starting in 2003 and 4. So it's not like we haven't been demanding of these 4 successive administrations that the U.S. Get out of Afghanistan. The challenge was, how do you do it? And we saw that it was not done perfectly at all, but it is a reality that the Taliban was probably going to be in charge of that country, since the governments that the U.S. has propped up over the 20 years were never strong. And the 300,000 people that the U.S. had trained in both the National Army and the National Police were folks who said, well, depending on who's got more firepower and who's going to be in charge, we'll go over to their side. And when they saw the handwriting on the wall that the Taliban was taking over all the southern provinces, rather than fighting to the last person, they said, well, we want to live to enjoy another day, and maybe there will be peace in the country if the U.S. gets out, and if the U.S. propped government gets out. Certainly concern for the women, the role of women in a Taliban government, but at least the U.S. is not killing people there.
Well, I certainly agree with you totally, and I want to thank you for the enormous service that you've contributed to the planet, and now to be able to call you a friend. So thank you very much, Anne.
Well, thank you, Metta, and thanks for all your lifetime of work for a better planet for us. Thank you.
It's been fun talking. Carry on.
Great, it has. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.